Thanks everyone for coming along. I suppose before we get into the meat of going serverless and how easy or otherwise it has been, I might ask each of the guys to talk a little bit about, I suppose, their own roles, respectively with BBC, Walmart Labs, and K15t. So Nick, if I can ask you to go first, maybe.
Sure, yeah. Hello, I'm Nick. I'm a senior software engineer at the BBC, specifically iPlayer, so that's our video-on-demand platform in the UK. Yeah, I think that's it.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Laura. I'm an engineering manager for Walmart Labs. I started by being an engineer on the Jet.com platform. I helped build the platform that was running Jet.com. Then Jet.com got acquired by Walmart. So now, a few years later, I am helping build the new platform for Walmart.com. Yeah.
Yeah, hi everybody, I'm Sebastian, and I'm working for K15t, so we're making some apps for Jira and Confluence. You probably know those products, so we have like a marketplace full of apps. We provide such marketplace apps, and one of our main products is to synchronize some like Jira data between different Jira instances. And yeah, we're using serverless functions now for like about 2 years in production now, and yes, that's one of the main things here.
Thanks, guys. Last but not least, my name's Eddie. I work for Codec Ireland. We are a full-stack Microsoft solutions provider. I look after our software development practice, which is basically providing services to customers locally and internationally around lean agile software development and all things DevOps. So guys, to kick off then in terms of going serverless, I suppose the first question really is around what was the key driver or motivation that made you guys look at going serverless as opposed to, say, conventional infrastructure? So again, maybe I'll start with you, Nick, on that one.
Yeah, sure. I think for us, it's there are two main key points. The first one is experimentation on a technical side, not MVTs or A/B tests that we talked about earlier. So it allows our engineers to spin up a function and for innovation reasons, or to try out something that we don't know yet whether it will scale very quickly and flexibly. We know exactly how much it's going to cost. We know exactly when it's going to run, and it's only going to run whilst we do this innovation. And the second bit that we've kind of started over the past year or so, which is just starting to roll out now, is because serverless functions are so compact and small, it allows us to be a lot closer to the user. So we host mostly in AWS, and AWS allows us to run Lambda serverless functions in their points of presence. So we've got 11, Amazon has 11 POPs in the UK, I think. And it just allows us to be a lot closer to the user rather than having to deploy the whole component in one data center in London or in Manchester or wherever. We can have all the small functions all over the country.
Thanks, Nick. Same to you, Laura.
Yeah, so first of all, as you said, rapid experimentation. That's a very good use case for serverless. Then if you look at serverless as functions in an event-driven architecture, that is another very good use case which we have implemented. So if you want to play around with an event-driven architecture, then serverless is a good place to start.
Thanks.
I can support what the others have said, basically. So like what we do is when we receive webhooks from Jira, or for our app mostly Jira, we don't know how many webhooks we receive, how often people are changing their issues, how much we need to synchronize. So in that case, what our decision was in the beginning, we want to only run our code when it's really necessary. And as we can get some spikes like thousands of webhooks within 2 seconds, for example, that's something I think serverless is a really good fit for.
Okay. So Nick, you mentioned cost there. I think a lot of people look at serverless as maybe one way of driving down costs, not just in terms of cloud consumption, but the cost of managing instances and associated infrastructure. So what's your experience been so far in terms of has cost reduced, and have you been able to measure that?
So I think overall, it's important to keep the balance. So while we do innovation, and the first use case I was talking about, cost has definitely gone down because we don't need to pay for the big service anymore. As these use cases or these experiments become more and more production ready, and we have more and more traffic on them, at some point there will be a threshold at which it becomes uneconomical to stay on serverless, and we kind of look at going back to it, back to running classic components. But as Sebastian said, it kind of depends as well on the traffic patterns. Like if you have spikes of thousands of requests within a second and nothing for the rest of the hour, then it might still be more economical to stay on serverless. So it depends. Yeah, but I think for us it's been good, and so we at the BBC overall we have 2.5 billion serverless executions per month. So someone must be seeing value in it.
Small scale. Thanks, Nick.
Right. So price-wise, it depends so much on the use case. It's if you're a startup and you just want to run something and take something out to the market really quick, go for it. Like that's probably the fastest thing you can do. But as you ramp up your usage, always be careful because it will become expensive. So my advice would be to always track the cost. It's not a given that serverless will be the cheapest option at any point in time.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a certain threshold available, and also what you also need to consider is you not only have like the Lambda functions that they have a certain cost threshold, but you also need to consider all the other services that you're using. So databases, maybe caches, whatever. So everything you need to buy in, because on the serverless functions you can only run a certain amount of code, of course, so you cannot run your own database cluster or whatever. So you need to buy in everything else. So that's what you also definitely need to consider here.
Okay. So I'm curious to know, in terms of other opportunities that have arisen as a byproduct of going serverless. So I suppose a lot of people feel, well, this is great. It's giving more power to my developers. Some people might say that as a negative, that it's very easy now for them to get access to infrastructure. Has that been your experience? Or have you recognized other opportunities as a result of going serverless? Might let Laura go first for a change. This is a curveball.
Sure. Sure. So if you don't keep an eye on cost, and if you are not aware of everything that's moving around, you will get in trouble, because applications developers, if they're not charged back, they will spend all the money they want. Like that's a given. It's not a question of will it happen. It's like a question of when will it happen. So that's about that. At the same time, you do want to enable them to experiment quickly, to get results quickly. So again, that's a good thing. But you have to establish certain boundaries there. So.
Okay, thank you. Sebastian?
Yeah, I think the cool thing is you can get run pretty quickly, and the maintenance costs what you have, for example, in what you would have with a usual server to update any kind of libraries, etc., or the system, that kind of falls apart, so you don't need to worry about that. But however, if you then use it a little bit more, the developers also need to understand what's actually happening with those single functions, and so that's when we discuss it, or in other teams, and they ask how does it actually work with those functions. That's often some sort of thing you need to be aware first before starting to apply it. I mean, the basic concept is quite easy. You have functions and you don't need to consider anything else or to maintain something, but the whole concept, what it means if you have so many instances running of your code and you have limited options to handle them, that makes it a little bit more complicated for the developers as well. So easy to start, yes, but then it gets more and more complex.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think on realizing options, I'm going to give one example of something that started out as a serverless function for us in iPlayer, and it was it was a label extraction. So for each new episode that became available on iPlayer, it's about 200 episodes a day. We can't really predict when, at what exact times they will become available because, well, we don't know how long the encode is going to take and all that, if they're captured off air or live programs and all that. So originally we got 200 episodes a day, and serverless was a great fit for that. It was innovation. But as we moved to supporting it full time to support the product, the issue that Sebastian was talking about became an issue. Like, people don't really know where the workflow comes in and how the whole picture fits together. Like, magically, sometimes there would be labels, and then if the episode gets modified later on, after it's been made available the first time around, the information isn't up to date anymore. So we've changed the whole architecture because of that reason, to update everything all the time and have a less event-driven workflow and a more understood approach that we're all comfortable with. So that was something that enabled us to be started really quickly and has now become a real thing, I guess.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Sebastian, I'll go to you after the next question. We've managed to get through 10 minutes without mentioning DevOps, so, but I know it's relevant for your business because you've got so many customers and there's pressure in terms of time to value. I'm curious, in terms of your use of serverless, is this part of a wider DevOps strategy in terms of getting code from dev into production? And if so, how has serverless helped you, or has it made a difference either way?
Yeah, so I think like in principle there are two things like DevOps and serverless. So of course you can use both and then you have a better process of bringing value to your customers. But I would say in general, like, you should of course definitely apply some sort of DevOps process. But if you then use serverless functions, or if you use containers or regular servers, I think that doesn't really matter. So in the end, for us, it's cool, of course, to have those serverless functions because if you want, you can have like updates nearly like in a second. As soon as you deploy or upload a new artifact for your functions, it gets applied immediately to all the following requests to your functions. So that's a pretty cool thing. So the deployments can be, of course, also very fast. You can also have some canary releases, of course. So, but in any way, I think this is making the process faster. But in principle, they're, from my point of view, two separate things.
Okay, thanks. So for you, Laura, is that question relevant in terms of how you work?
So in my eyes, DevOps is there regardless if we're talking about serverless or a platform that runs microservices or runs containers or whichever. It comes with kind of some integration and support for application developers to see their logs, to set up alerts, to actually deploy their software in a reliable fashion, a continuous fashion. So this should happen regardless if you go for serverless or if you decide to go with some other solution. So end of the day, they should get the benefit of the same tooling around the solution.
Okay, thank you.
For us, I think DevOps was a hindering stone, a roadblock, when it came to introducing serverless functions, because, as Laura said, we want to use the same tooling for DevOps as for serverless functions as we did for classic components. But because you have less control over the environment in which the function runs, you don't necessarily have that control. So we kind of had to build our own tools to get the logs out of Amazon into our own logging platform for our ops team to be able to look at it. And our continuous deployment platform wasn't set out to deploy Lambda functions when they were first released, but obviously our developers were very keen to get started on them because they're so powerful. So we had to not use our in-house deployment system for a while and use the serverless framework. So yeah, there was a lot of hand cranking involved to be able to align the tools for serverless and serverful, if that's the word. Yeah.
Okay. That's a nice segue into the next question. So other than the DevOps roadblock, what have been the other big challenges, I suppose, in terms of implementing serverless?
Besides what I just said, I think it's engineers being comfortable with it. Like, it's a new paradigm. Users need to know what they're doing. I think there's still a lot of people who are more comfortable with the classic workflows in supporting them. Like, we don't have a separate serverless ops team to classic component teams. Everyone kind of just tries to pick the solution that's best for them, and if they're more familiar with the more expensive one, they will probably pick the more expensive one first, which might not be ideal for the business, but it might be better for the ops side of things.
Sure, okay. So, Laura, in Walmart, what have been the biggest challenges?
Right. So the biggest challenge for us when using functional programming and event-driven programming is actually the observability side of things. So if the system is simple, if you have 1, 2, 3 functions, and then they're event-driven and they're tied together by some events, that's fine. But we ended up having like 2,000 to 4,000 microservices, and that's nearly impossible to reason about and to understand each one of them, like the small microservice, what it does. So then that's where you need things like Zipkin or Jaeger or OpenTrace or something that will allow you to see, to understand your system via the requests that flow through them. So that was the biggest challenge for us, to keep a hands-on understanding of our systems.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, besides having like a complex architecture, I would like to add another point. So we, for example, had the problem of, we want to provide a REST API, but we tried to do this using serverless functions. However, in the end, we decided, okay, we just gave up because like we already had some sort of REST API written in Java, and we wanted to migrate that to those serverless functions. However, in the end, we said, okay, that's not really a good way to accomplish that on those serverless functions. So you might also need to think about your use case for your serverless functions. So in the end, we said, okay, we have separate service which is running on usually EC2 instances, and they are serving the REST API and everything else, like our synchronization process and flow. It's running on the Lambda function. So that's more rather technical addition to what you have already said, so from the architecture and also the organizational points here.
Okay. So Laura, your business is obviously retail, one of the biggest retail names in the world. In terms of things like security, regulatory compliance, governance, has going serverless introduced any kind of challenges in that area, or has it been very similar to the old ways?
Right. So we have an interesting use case, as in we're not using AWS because we don't want to. And then we're limited to maybe Azure functions or Google Cloud functions. But really what we're doing in Walmart is building our own platform on top of the cloud providers, so that we become agnostic of the provider, and then we offer either functional, OpenFaaS, we implement OpenFaaS, or we do Knative, stuff like that. So then the security part comes in-house, kind of. So, for example, with Knative, we'll run Istio, and we'll have even in-flight encryption. So, that's how we take care of it, to be honest.
Okay. Nick, is that of relevance at the BBC?
I'm just trying to think. So we do process a lot of user data, obviously, like what people have seen, and we deal a lot with children in the audience as well. But I think the technical principles behind it don't differ too much. Like access control, boundaries, system boundaries, all apply the same as they do for classic components. Yeah, I can't think of any example where the choice of architecture has made a difference really to the considerations we're having there.
Okay, that's good to know. Sebastian?
Yeah, basically the same. So the good part is of those serverless functions, you can't attack a server which isn't up and running at the moment. So that's the good part from technical side. But you still have the same challenges that you also have with the usual application or whatever. You need, like, your application needs to be secure as well. So if you introduce any kind of security vulnerabilities that can come through serverless functions or through containers or whatever, if your application code doesn't handle it well, you still won't catch them. So
Okay.
I think, yeah.
Actually, yeah, that just reminded me of something. You were talking about containers, and I guess you can call that serverless as well. And when we deal with containers, in one way, it becomes much more of a black hole of where we get the source from, especially when we build off containers or images that other people have provided on the internet. It's like just pull in this random code. So maybe that is a consideration there.
Okay. Are you finding now, since going serverless, that you're using more services that are native to whatever cloud ecosystem that you're using, or Auth0, or authentication products, that there's opportunities there more than there was before? Is that a relevance?
I'll start. I think for us it's again more of a roadblock because we're used to the tools we have from the old world, and we have to introduce new tools. Like I said earlier, we used the serverless framework initially, which was a new way of working for us and a new way of doing deployments. And like some internal libraries for authentication don't work anymore, and we kind of have to deal with the vendors about, hey, how do we make this more efficient? How can we work with this better? So it's certainly changing the tools that we do need to use. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Relevant.
I'm pretty sure you need to start using API gateways, application gateways, Connect, all the basically all the ecosystem that the vendor provides around serverless, because otherwise you don't have any visibility, you don't have any control around anything. So it is, in a very good way, a way to do vendor lock-in, to be fair.
We were talking also about like challenges with external services, right? Okay, good. So, yes, one point I would like to add here is that if you use the serverless functions and you have, like, you're using an external services, you need to make sure that they can also handle those spikes that you are experiencing with your Lambda functions. So if you have like 1,000 Lambda functions running at the same time because they now got called because of some sort of event, and you're calling an external service, you must make sure that the service can handle this load as well and can also scale up to that amount of calls that you're making here. So that's something you might only realize until it happens, if you haven't tested it before properly. But that's definitely a big thing you need to consider with those serverless functions. Or you have some sort of limits, capacity limit of your functions. But yeah, that's then on the other side something why would you then use Lambda or serverless functions?
Okay. So Laura, you mentioned vendor lock-in. In your case, you're locked out of one vendor, presumably because Amazon are a competitor to Walmart.
Yeah.
So maybe I won't ask you the vendor lock-in question because you're left with two, which is Microsoft and Google.
Yeah.
But Sebastian, has this been an issue with k15t that you're concerned now that maybe the perception was, well, I have my instances, they're portable with different vendors. You're primarily on AWS?
Yeah, we are using AWS.
Has there been a concern about being too locked into that vendor?
We're not using like a different vendors at the moment. So for us, there was like the discussion didn't really start about that. And I think it's also fine to stick to one vendor. I mean, the cool thing is if you do it like you're doing it, that you can switch between the vendors. Of course, if one goes down, you could take the other one. But yeah, things can happen anyway. So you can prepare for that, of course. But the question is, how much work do you also want to spend here? Because it also like costs you a lot to keep this that you're not in a vendor lock-in.
Okay. That would be unique.
Yeah, I mean, when did we start moving into the cloud? 2014, I'm going to say. I'm just going to throw a number out there, I don't know. And it's been Amazon ever since. And we kind of started to adopt, actually, no, I'm lying. There are some legacy Windows applications which are now moved to Azure, and we have started adopting Google Cloud as well. So like our development teams aren't trying to choose a different vendor, but for us and our team, yeah, we're pretty locked in. Is that going to be a problem? Depends how Amazon behaves and how our contract with them is going to continue in the future. I'm not looking forward to any changes, but it might become a problem. And with serverless, it's a bigger problem than it is with classic components. If you have your RPM of your microservice, you can push that on any Linux box that runs anywhere, be it Azure or Google Cloud or Ali's cloud. But with your serverless functions, all you have is code. It's literal code. Like you need to set up the infrastructure around it, and that's going to be a lot of work.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so I'm conscious we have less than 5 minutes left, so I'll just ask a final question, and I'll leave a bit of time for questions at the end. This was really to wrap up then. I'm curious to know future plans based on the experience you've already had with serverless. Do you see that this being adapted going back retrospectively into infrastructure, or going forward it being adapted as almost a default way of deployment? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think for us, the Lambda on the edge thing, and I'm sure other platforms have equivalents of that, is something that we've seen success with over the past couple of weeks since rolling it out, and we probably want to do more with that. So in terms of getting things closer to the user and make use of the full ecosystem that we get from Amazon, there's probably more serverless to come. We're also looking at Docker and containerization and making things more efficient that way in terms of resource sharing. What way we're going to end up going into, I can't say, and servers are definitely here to stay. Serverless is just addition for the more unpredictable loads or the more distributed loads, I guess.
Very good, thank you.
Right, for us in Walmart, Walmart probably uses all the technologies out there in the world, so we'll probably still use Azure functions, we'll probably still use Google Cloud functions, but in our platform that we're building, we want to offer Knative, and that's what we're going to do. And in fairness as to like, should you go serverless or not, it's really a case by case. It very much depends on your workload, it depends on what you want from your application. So really, it's really a case by case.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, basically same here. So you need to know like what you want to do with your system. It depends heavily on the workload. What I think is pretty cool if you start using those serverless functions, you can like basically also pick between all the different services. Now they interact nicely with each other. At least that's what I know from AWS. So you can then like, okay, I have my functions here, and now I want to extend it with some analytics or machine learning, and then I say, okay, I just connect those different dots or services in that case, and they play nicely with each other, and then you can at least in theory, pretty easily extend also your app and your capabilities. So I think that's really interesting and a good point of those serverless functions, but again, it depends. So the first point should be thinking about your use case, if it really makes sense to use those serverless functions.
Okay, thank you. Excellent answer. So on behalf of UXDX, I'd like to thank all three of you for your time today.